Over the past 6 decades, Alan Ayckbourn has become one of the world's most popular and performed playwrights. As of 2021, he has written 85 full-length plays, and many of them have gone on to be performed worldwide. They've also been translated into more than 35 languages. They have accumulated numerous awards over the decades, including Olivier's, Tony's and Molière's. Several of his plays, such as Absurd Person Singular and The Norman Conquests, are also considered classics of British theatre of the 20th century. In Spotlight, we're going to be looking at some of the most significant plays in the Ayckbourn play canon, looking at the stories behind them, their creations and why they are significant. Some of the plays you'll be very familiar with, some of them less so. We're going to start with the very first play, The Square Cat, and look to see what makes The Square Cat such a significant play in the Ayckbourn canon. Welcome to Spotlight. The Square Cat was written in 1959 and premiered at the Library Theatre Scarborough. Now, what we always have to remember when considering the early Ayckbourn plays is that Alan Ayckbourn didn't set out to be a playwright or a director. He wanted to be an actor. He left school at 17 with the intention of becoming an actor, joining Donald Wolfett initially with his company at the Edinburgh Festival, and then working his way through a number of companies, including the Connaught Theatre and the Leatherhead Theatre Club, before he ended up in Scarborough. His aim was to act, not to write. And ironically, it is his acting that leads him to write his first play. In December 1958, he was appearing in David Campton's play Ring of Roses, and he wasn't terribly impressed by it. So he went to Stephen Joseph, and Stephen was the artistic director of the Library Theatre and is the most influential person in Alan Ayckbourn's life. And Alan said to Stephen, "I am not happy with the quality of the roles I'm playing." So Stephen called his bluff, and Stephen said, "Well, if you think you can do better, write me a play, but you have to give yourself the lead role, and it has to be something that will entertain audiences." Alan, as any foolish 20-year-old would do, agreed and said, "Okay, I can do that. Not a problem." Before Alan actually got round to writing The Square Cat, though, there was a very significant moment in his life. The playwright Harold Pinter had premiered his first play, The Birthday Party, in London in 1958, and it had notoriously been a complete flop. Stephen Joseph knew Pinter from the Central School of Drama, and he contacted him and said, "I think your play deserves another shot. How would you like to come to Scarborough, direct it, but it has to be in the round and with the Scarborough Company?" Harold Pinter agreed and promptly came up to Scarborough, where he cast Alan in the pivotal role of Stanley. The play was never performed at the Library Theatre, but it went on tour and was featured in Leicester and Birmingham, where it received rave reviews. Pinter would later say the production reaffirmed his faith both in the play and his own abilities as a playwright. So Alan Ayckbourn starred in the second production of Harold Pinter's The Birthday Party, which also marked the directorial debut of Pinter himself. And it had a profound effect on him. Alan says frequently that the writing within the play and working with Pinter himself was incredibly inspiring and influential because it was like nothing else he had done before. And whilst I'm not saying that The Birthday Party influences how he wrote The Square Cat, because they are diametrically opposed, there is nothing similar between them, I think the first seeds of what you could do as a playwright are laid in that experience with Pinter. The chances are Alan wrote The Square Cat in the immediate aftermath of working with Pinter, and what's not widely known is it was co-authored. Alan actually wrote it with his wife Christine Rowland. Now the reason for this is that it's a first play, and Alan's biographer, Paul Allen, sensibly argues that Alan already had a gift for plotting and dialogue, but Christine had a better grasp of structure. And together they created this play, The Square Cat. Now what's very obvious when you read The Square Cat is that it is all about Alan Ayckbourn the actor. It's not about writing a great play. It's about writing a play which showcases just how good an actor Alan is. And it centres around a rock and roll star called Jerry Wattis, but who also has a mild-mannered alter ego called Arthur Brummage. So there's plenty of scope here. Alan plays two very different characters, and there's plenty of chance to showcase his abilities. Now, somewhat perversely, given that he knew he was writing it for himself, Alan wrote a lead role which involved three things. He had to sing, he had to dance, and he had to play the guitar. Now, of these three things, Alan couldn't sing, he wasn't really a dancer, and he certainly couldn't play the guitar. So, several weeks before rehearsals began, he found himself at a local guitar teacher asking what could he learn in 3 weeks. And the guitar teacher said, "Very little, mate. I can teach you a couple of chords." And so Alan was taught the song My Love Gave Me a Cherry. As you can probably imagine from the title, it's not very rock and roll. But Alan learnt this song, and during performances he would frequently strike up the first chord and then just go, and the lights would come down on him. The Square Cat apparently took 2 weeks to write, and it was attributed to the author Roland Allen. This is the pseudonym Alan uses for his first 4 full-length plays, and it's a nod to the fact that it was co-authored. It's a mix of Christine Rowland and Alan Ayckbourn's name. And it wasn't really a great secret that it was Alan Ayckbourn who had written the play. Although it was credited in the programme to Roland Allen, there was also a programme note which said the play was written by the lead actor, Alan Ayckbourn. I think it was just to differentiate the two strands of his career, and probably hedging his bets, because at the time Alan wanted to be an actor. The play had a cast of 5 and was in 3 acts. Now, an interesting quirk of the Library Theatre at the time is that they didn't have intervals, so this 3-act full-length play ran straight through. It premiered on the 31st of July 1959 at the Library Theatre, Scarborough, and was a great success. It was the first play at the Library Theatre to run for 3 weeks in repertory. To achieve this, because it was only intended to initially run for 2, Stephen cancelled a week of the run of David Campton's play Frankenstein, which had been a bit of a flop. So Alan's play was making history at the theatre and was the second most profitable play of the season. As to its success, well, I think that can be judged by the fact that Stephen Joseph immediately commissioned Alan to write a second play for the year, and Alan duly wrote Love After All, which was premiered in Christmas 1959. The Square Cat was performed again on tour, but by this point Alan was serving a very short-lived national service, so he wasn't able to star in it, and the role of Jerry went to Barry Boyes instead. Now, as for the play itself, we can actually read the script. There's surprisingly quite a lot of copies of it surviving. This is despite the fact that Alan said at one point he had tried to destroy every copy of it. And there's quite a few of the Square Cat, so we can look at it and explore it. If you're a researcher looking to find out more about the Square Cat, you can find it at the British Library. It's also held in the John Rylands Library at the University of Manchester, and of course there are several copies in the Ayckbourn Archive at the Borthwick Institute for Archives at the University of York. And we're lucky that we've got a copy of the play from the Ayckbourn Archive here that I can show you a glimpse of what the play is like. Here we have an original manuscript held by the Ayckbourn Archive. The play is attributed to Roland Allen, which, as we noted earlier, is the combination of Alan and his wife's name. As we turn over the first page, we see that it's described as a cool comedy in 3 acts, and the title is a pun on this. In the terms of 1950s, square is uncool, whereas cat is very cool, so it's an uncool, cool person, which describes Jerry Wattis and his alter ego Arthur Brummage in one. Moving on, we have the characters of 5 actors, and it's a 3-act play, which was very common at the time and very common for Alan, right up until absurd person singular. And the first page of The Square Cat, rarely seen and a delight to be able to present on Spotlight. The Square Cat by Roland Allen. As to the play itself, well, this is a competent play. It's an interesting, if not terribly memorable farce, but this is a 20-year-old writing his first play. And as Alan has frequently said, it was a quite strange choice of genre for a playwright to debut with. Alan has always felt that farce is one of the hardest genres to write for. It requires a great deal of technical skill. So it takes a particularly precocious 20-year-old to say, hang on, I'm going to write a farce for my first play. It's also quite strange in that Alan begins his life with a farce. Now, you hear frequently people refer to Alan Ayckbourn as a farcer. And I have to say, as his archivist, this is complete nonsense. Alan reckons that he has written one true farce in his entire life, and that is Taking Steps. I would go a bit further and say he's actually written 3 true farces in his life: The Square Cat, Love After All, and Taking Steps. It's just that Love After All and The Square Cat aren't available to produce, and you can only read them in archive, so they don't really count. The plot is unexceptional, but you might recognise it. Essentially, it's about a woman who has a clandestine meeting in a country house and who is followed unexpectedly by her partner. Sound familiar? Well, yes, it's sort of the concept for Relatively Speaking, but I think it's pushing it to say one influenced the other. What we have in the play is a mother escapes to the countryside for a secret rendezvous with the rock star Jerry Wattis, to whom she has been promised a dance with. The father and his children follow her, and then we get all manner of farcical goings on, as it transpires that Jerry is not happy with his life as a rock and roll star and prefers his alter ego's life, Arthur Brummage, as a very quiet, reserved person. Arthur falls in love with the daughter of the mother. And what develops from there is confusion as the mother tries to have her dance, the daughter tries to get her man, and the father tries to get his wife back. It's quite an obvious play, and there's very little in there which tells us about the playwright Alan Ayckbourn is going to become. It finishes very conventionally. Wife and husband are reconciled. Jerry Wattis is chased out of the house, apparently by the father, with a battle axe. And the daughter finds love with this mild-mannered, very nice young man, who is secretly, of course, Jerry Wattis. What's interesting is that in this manuscript, there's a couple of scenes that have been cut out which do lay the groundwork for what comes. There's a very interesting scene in which the husband and wife argue, and she is very quick to point out his shortcomings. And it feels very much like something which would come later within Time and Time Again, perhaps Absurd Person Singular. But it's cut from the play, and perhaps that's a young playwright not having the confidence yet to go down this path. What we can learn from it, though, is that it's an acceptable play. It was successfully received. It was apparently quite a funny play. So we're laying the groundwork for Alan the playwright. But what we have to remember is that really doesn't develop until 1965. That Alan's first 5 plays until 1962 are really all about him, and all about him as an actor. What of the playwright himself? What does he think of the Square Cat? Well, in the 1981 book Conversations with Ayckbourn, he gives a rather nice quote in which he says, "I don't think it was very good as a play, looking back on it, but it was okay for a first one. It's not one that one would ever want to see done again." And of course it was never done again, and it probably won't ever be performed again. It was withdrawn several years after its first performance and has never been published. But the reason for that is Alan Ayckbourn knows that he was a playwright learning his craft, and he says all his early plays that have been withdrawn are showing the process of a playwright learning, and that as a result he really wouldn't want to see them performed. That then is the story of the Square Cat. I hope you found it interesting to go behind the scenes of his first play, and in future spotlights we'll be looking at a couple of his other early plays and how he was progressing as a playwright. In the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed Spotlight. I hope you'll subscribe to the Alan Ayckbourn channel, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.